Hello, everyone. This is Patricia Kong. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am coming to you from the Boston, Massachusetts office, and very excited today to be able to actually have this conversation or do this webinar with two of my friends. We are across 3 time zones. Usually Ralph Jocham and Don McGreal and I are having these types of conversations over a glass of something. But we thought this time it'd be great to be able to share some of this information with you and talk to you about goals, measures, and other mysteries. So today we are going to try a little bit experiment in terms of PowerPoint and Mural and all that stuff. I'll try to do my best, but we're going to be using a couple platforms. So we're using Zoom today. Quick guidelines: your microphones will be muted. We're going to have this session recorded, and we're going to have the materials uploaded for you at the end. We do look forward to your questions. I'm going to be doing my best to watch the questions and also participate in terms of talking about measurement, evidence-based management, and chime in where I can with Ralph and Don. So who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org is the home of Scrum. Founded by Ken Schwaber, who's the co-creator of Scrum. He's our friend, us 3 people here. And we're focused on training, education, and community. So helping people and teams solve complex problems is our mission. Very important for us to mention that this is a mission-based organization, and we are focused on developing a global community. As you can see that there are some different faces and demographics of us. So let's start. And then let's get to it. So this is me, I'm Patricia. I work at Scrum.org. I've been here for almost 9 years. And I am the product owner of Enterprise and Leadership Solutions. And I think about empiricism's role in organizational change. Wrote some stuff, guides, evidence-based management, Nexus guides. Hopefully you've seen those on the Scrum.org website. I am a youth mentor, and very passionate about bridging opportunity gaps and equity and pushing barriers there, and also for organizations. So, looking at the psychology of organizations. I am going to kick it off to my friend Don for him to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. Great seeing you, Patricia, again, and Ralph. So I work for Improving. I'm in Dallas, Texas right now, and Improving's all over North America, Canada, US, and Mexico now too. Wrote a book with my buddy Ralph here, the professional product owner. And I've been a PST with Scrum.org for 11 years now, I think. And I also have a website called Tasty Cupcakes, my neglected stepchild. But that's, if you haven't seen it before, it's a collection of all sorts of games and things you can do with your teams or in a training environment. However, and there's a bunch for remote stuff. Obviously, last year we got an influx of those, so check it out.
Well, this is me, Ralph Jocham. I'm pretty similar to Don. I'm based in Bern, Switzerland, though. I've been a trainer also since March 2010 with Scrum.org. I have my own company, Effective Agile, since now 10 years. So March this year was 10 years of my own company. I'm a coach, consultant, trainer. Basically, I have global experience. So I worked a little bit in the UK, the US. Originally, I'm from Germany. Now I'm based in Bern, Switzerland. Don and I, we wrote the book, The Professional Product Owner, together.
Okay, and, guys, you can show your book.
Here we have it, yes. And that's actually a Chinese translation and a Polish translation. So anyway, I've been Agile since like 20 years. So I came through Agile through extreme programming. So my background is computer science.
All right. So one of the reasons that I invited Don and Ralph here is because they are experts in professional product ownership. So I thought that the contribution to the conversation when we were talking about evidence-based management as a framework, as an approach, what is it? And looking at the changes that we've made in parallel almost with the changes that happened with the Scrum Guide. How do those things relate to each other? How can we start to think about this really in our organizations and with the teams? So I'm going to just do a quick ditty. Evidence-based management is based off of the EBM guide, the Evidence-Based Management Guide. And it has been focused largely around thinking about value, business value, and how that contributes to agility. It looks at 4 key value areas and how we can start to make decisions based off the evidence that we find in those 4 key value areas. The evidence that we generally look at is measurement, metrics, that's the data, right? And then it's about how do we look at those things holistically. So if I go through that really quickly, current value is where you are today. Unrealized value is what is the potential outside of your organization? What's the potential outside of what your product is currently doing? What is that potential? And then if you look at the bottom 2 circles on the screen, time to market and ability to innovate, those speak for themselves, but it really focuses on the organizational capability. So we said, when you are looking at, is Agile working for you? Are you delivering value? How does it help you if you only understand time to market, right? So we started looking at those 4 key value areas. There's a long history and there's a lot of information that can be out there for EBM, but what we found was not only out in the field of what implementations look like, but also just in our own understanding and with the development of EBM in the community, that a lot of people would say, hey, Patricia, it's great, I'm using EBM, I'm measuring this, now what? And the part around, if you have something to inspect, how do you adapt that, was getting lost. And so we started thinking about the notion of goals and continuous improvement. Don, Ralph, am I missing? Is there anything that you want to add about the origins, how we've thought about EBM? We could go 10 years back, but any other concise points?
EBM's gotten a reputation of being like a bunch of agile metrics, and I think because they always focus, each of these 4 areas have a bunch of key value measures that you could use, right? They're kind of generic and they apply in a lot of situations, not every one. And that's not exactly what EBM is for, right? And so when I really boil it down, I look at EBM in 3 areas. This is one. This is about evidence, like you said. It's about tracking. So what does EBM give us? It gives us the ability to track through these measures. So it gives us some evidence that we can respond to. But then the key aspects that we don't have is goals. That gives us the focus. So then tracking towards what is a question that we don't always ask. Okay, so it says this is the number. What does that even mean? So the 3 aspects are goals, which we'll talk about more, I guess. And then the focus, which gives us focus. And then the ability to track through this evidence, these measurements. And then thirdly, that it's that experiment loop, right? That gives us the ability to adapt, to adjust as necessary. So focus, the ability to track, and the ability to adjust is what EBM is all about, in my opinion, anyways.
And I think this fits really back kind of also what we wrote in our book. We have like this idea of the 3 V's, like vision, value, and validation. And it's really like, hey, where do we want to go? And how can we get the best out of that for our customers? And at the end, somehow we need to validate, was it the right things we built for our customers? Were we successful in doing that? How could we improve on this again, where the evidence comes into the picture?
Yeah.
And that was never done on purpose, right? It was like something we realized afterwards is as product owners, the 3 V's were very important to us. Vision for focus, value in terms of how we look at success, and the validation, the ability to see if we're making the difference in the right way, and if we have to adjust from there. It fits perfectly into those 3 areas of EBM.
Close to empirical fit. Yeah.
So I mean, you really clearly stated that, and I really appreciate how that hopefully makes it more palatable when we're talking about measurement. And if we are looking and we are trying to pursue value and we are trying to make that more visible and more real than when we're typically having a conversation about measurement, I think what that can do is that we can add some more color to value and the incentive of why we are doing something. And I don't mean incentive in terms of incentives. I probably used a wrong word. But what motivates us, instead of just, we're thinking about alignment, what are we working toward? But how do we as people working in an organization toward goal, something for a customer, what how invested do we start to feel? Because then we could start to think about things like, are the goals right or not? There's something that you mentioned about the experiment loop. So do you guys remember this, that EBM was not, Ralph, you probably have that big book when we were talking about EBM and we were developing it, evidence-based management, the management method, that it's not actually based on that, the whole notion that it was like, that's like, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to this one here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So EBM is a little bit of that, because I think that book talks about you don't actually know what's working in the organization. You need evidence. But
what's the name of the book, just so people
it's
people can hear?
It's hard facts, dangerous half truths, and total nonsense. And essentially, it's about core beliefs. Like, they talk about incentives at work, which we are still doing. They don't work. There's evidence it doesn't work, but that's what we are still teaching in business schools. That's what is still out there. So it's kind of, sometimes it takes a really, really long time to make people step back and accept the evidence. And I think we see a good example right now with Corona all over the globe. There's hard facts from research, from scientists, that there's certain things don't work, but look at the politics. It's just like,
100%. Way to catch me off guard talking about coronavirus. So the Don, I think you and I talk a lot more about this from an evidence-based medicine standpoint. You want to hit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the foundation. That's when I first started hearing about it. Is the medical industry has been using this technique for a while, and they're in the same sort of, they're dealing with complex problems, looking for solutions. And if anybody out there is in the medical field, don't hold me accountable to anything I say here. It could be completely wrong. But my understanding is, a long time ago, upon inspection of like clinics and things like that, they were noticing that when they looked at all like the deaths or mistakes that were made, surprisingly, it wasn't in terms of, it wasn't the new doctors, it was like the more experienced doctors often that were part of that. And when they researched it, it turned out to be, a doctor who'd seen things 100 times before, see some symptoms again and go, easy, here's some prescription, here's what you need to do. And they didn't do any proper tests because they'd seen it so much. So they relied instead on their experience, their gut, and other things, right? That get in the way. Whereas the more junior ones, they didn't have that same kind of, they weren't as comfortable doing this, so they would make sure they would do the tests and respond based on the tests. So they introduced this thing called evidence-based medicine to reduce the number of errors, and that has shown to really, really help the medical industry. It changed a lot from that, and that's all we're asking here is, from a management standpoint, when things are so complex, that we should be relying on data, on evidence. We call, like, Scrum it follows an empirical process model. Well, if it were empirical, then we should be using this. We should be evidence-based before we make decisions, knowing we don't know all the answers. We can't just rely on our experience, like in those clinical examples. We have to use based on some sort of data, right? So when you go to the doctor, and this is me, I'm Irish, living in Texas, grew up in the Middle East, so I get like stuff removed all the time. And I had my doctor look at one thing, and I said, well, do you know what it is? And they said, oh yeah, that's basal cell. But we're going to do a biopsy and send it away. I'm like, well, that sounds like it costs a lot of money. Can't you just like treat it? And they're like, and she just sort of laughed and said, that's not how it works. And I thought it was a money grabbing thing, but that's evidence based. We have to be sure. So when it comes back, just make sure something else, based on her experience, it's probably basal cell. She knows it is, but it has to come back before they treat it. And that's kind of what we're using it here for, from a management perspective. In our world, can we use that same technique?
Yeah, I think the whole notion of EBM in general, using evidence, is taking the best evidence you have available. So that's what we, for a decade, have been questioning on what evidence have people been using, organizations, management been using to make those decisions. And, data is a part of it. There is a bit of experience and all that other stuff. I think we can never be, well, can we? I think in the medical industry, right? Depending on, you will say likely, right? So at least having some sort of guidance rather than just doing something because it's the will, or, you have a very highly paid person who has the will to drive something forward, or a product is somebody's pet project. There's adding a little bit more here. So
Yeah.
I actually just, I tried to really nicely put the mural up. Hopefully you guys are seeing this. And one of the reasons that we're doing this is because there are some new aspects into the guide, EBM guide, that we want to start to align with what we see and what is in the Scrum guide, with which Ralph and Don played a large part in the last update. So one of the things that you're going to see is this notion around goals. So if I just instruct myself to zoom into that, where we're talking about goals in EBM, there's 3 types of goals that we've talked about, that we talk about there. One is around strategic goals. So something that the organization would like to achieve, it's super important. It's very big and far away. There's uncertainties. And this notion of intermediate goals. So something that's going to get you strategic, it's on the path, because it's going to tell us, is that strategic goal still accurate? And then immediate tactical goals, which are things that we know are going to happen probably at the sprint level. So they are probably following, SMART, a SMART format, but that time boundary is very important there, and that it's very specific, and that we think it's achievable, right? It's measurable and it's realistic. One of the things that I'm going to actually do is, okay, Don, why'd you throw up focus here?
So while we were in here, I was just going back to those 3 areas, right? So it just made me think of it, like the goals are about the focus when we think of EBM. And then I also put track next to the measures, and then adjust next to the experiment loop as well. So I didn't mean to distract you there, but.
Well, the experiment loop, let's show that here first, right? So I showed you that in the PowerPoint, but this experiment loop, see that from the distance of, there's this magic wand, I call it. There's that strategic goal. The intermediate goal is something that we're going to try to do to achieve that. And then we can talk about focus and all these other things, right? Now, we're talking about this notion of alignment, this notion of current state. Don and Ralph, we can talk about that. I will say, in my opinion, and what I think is that a strategic goal, intermediate goal, and current state, all these other things are not decompositions. We are on a path to try to reach those things, which are those experiment loops you see here. Now, one of the questions that I want to address is somebody who's saying, we have all these goals now from EBM, and we have this notion, if you're familiar with scaling Scrum, the Nexus goal, and if you have, in looking at the Scrum guide, there's a product goal. How does a product goal, what is a product goal, and how does that fit into EBM, especially looking at focus, track, and adjust here?
So if you look at the magic wand graphic, so the strategic goal, think about it, this could be the vision of your product. And this could be really far out, maybe something you might never achieve, but it's still worthwhile to pursue. Sweden has this example. They want to have no death in transport anymore on the streets. Maybe they'll get there at some point, maybe if they have a lucky year. But I think this is a good goal to have, like minimize the casualties we have on our roads. So then the intermediate goal, that's how you can think about now with the Scrum Guide 2020 update with the product goal. Because there was always this problem. We had a vision for a product and we had a sprint goal. Vision very strategic, sprint goal very tactical, but there was this long stretch in between. And this is where now the product goal fits in. And this is your intermediate goal, essentially. It's like, what could we achieve in the next 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 months in regards to our vision we want to get towards?
Yeah. One of the comments in terms of when we're thinking about these goals, that experiment loop is obviously inspiring. It's very much about the Toyota Kata approach. So just something that was noticed. But when we tie these things into how we think about what does that measurement of that value look like? How are we aligning to these things? How are we pursuing our goals? This is what we're using that experiment loop and the Toyota Kata approach to express. The product goals. So another thing that's coming in is when we're looking, how do we think about these things from a cadence? So how do you guys think the product goal? How often are you looking at that in terms of the intermediate goal and strategic goal?
I mean, in the Scrum Guide, it states that the product goal is in the product backlog. And this is just a simple sentence, but the ramifications are, in my opinion, in my Scrum personal professional opinion, huge. Because sometimes you see product backlogs, they are like years of work. And I don't see them as product backlogs anymore. I see them as dumping grounds. So now we have a vision. This is what we want to achieve. And we think this is the first tangible intermediate goal we need to achieve. What should we do for that? And let's put that into our current product backlog and let's work towards that product goal in our sprints, guided by the sprint goals we have. And maybe once in a while a sprint fails and you have to adjust and go back and do this again. But once we have reached this product goal, we're getting close to reaching it. Okay, now we're getting there, cool. So what could be the next one? And then you think about what could be the next one. This is how you essentially start to refill the new product backlog.
Yeah, the vision is years, right? If ever achievable. It's just something that we're always moving towards. It's aspirational. So the product goal is a little bit more doable. And if we're really dealing with complex work, beyond a year is hard to know where we're going to be, right? So product goal, I usually 6 months to a year kind of thing is what I shoot for. And what's interesting is even before the Scrum Guide 2020, I followed a lot of 4DX, 4 disciplines of execution. And I know the way I do it as a product, I like to equate the product goal to the wildly important goal that's introduced in 4DX. So if you haven't heard of it, the 4 disciplines of execution, the first one is focus on a WIG, a wildly important goal. And they basically say, pick something, choose what would make it successful. So if it's like, we want to increase sales, well, what percentage of increase would you say would be worth this investment? So we want to increase it by 20% and now put time to it. We want to increase it 20% by the end of the year, within 6 months. What are you hoping to achieve here? So that now gives us something to measure against every single sprint, every month, whatever your cadence is.
I know Don loves his 40X, and I have some, I think Ralph does too. And I do have, I understand that structure. What I think is important, and that actually brings us down to this little part that I haven't talked about, is the types of measures and how we think about the goals. And so one of the things that I would encourage and urge clients and people to do is to think about the types of measures that we're looking at. Sorry, I'm futzing with this. So one of the things that can happen if we focus when we're talking about those golden 40X and we're looking at that measurement, same thing for OKRs, is that I would encourage people to think about that and add the value layer to it and think about it in terms of outcomes. So 3 kinds of measures, right? So activities, things that people do, outputs, things that people produce, and outcomes. You can start to think about how are things being measured and what are you actually measuring? So if I were to say, hey team, what are all the things that you're measuring? Where do they sort out here? It'd be interesting to see where they are, because what that would also mean is that your goals are probably sitting in those areas too. And so we urge people to think about the outcome, because that outcome is about that change in satisfaction or experience for someone, the customer. And that's thinking about things that is actually going to have effect from that value perspective. So when we even look at a roadmap, could we flip that so everything is in an outcome? And then of course, we're going to be looking at outputs and activities to try to hit that stuff. But that's where sometimes I rub a little bit against 40X. I think it's a great model. It's just keeping in mind that is that outcome, that thing that we're measuring actually for the customer rather than getting just stuff done.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I use it as I do the visioning separately from that, right? So my vision or strategic goal does not equate to what I understand in 40X or how I build the wig. It's the vision is about who we're building this for and how we're going to change their life, right? And that's usually what I look for. I look for that kind of emotional attachment to it. Whose life are we trying to change and how? And that gives us that motivation. And then the product goal becomes, okay, so how do we now measure? It needs to be measurable. Something more like outcome would be how we change their life. Output is the stuff that we're going to try to do along the way. Like, okay, let's get going with the vaccines, right? And then we'll pay attention to the outcomes, these lagging metrics, to see if it's helping, right? As these vaccines are being used or being put in place, we are achieving our product goal. Now, what is the outcome? Are the cases going down? Are deaths going down? Probably above all. So yeah, I agree with that. You know, I use 40X in terms of the wig, and then the other aspects of it too, the dashboard and the lead, you know, focusing on lead measures as well, which also shows up here too, right? So when you look at the 4 areas for measurements, the top 2 are market value ones, which I like to equate to lagging metrics. These are not things you can just go and shift and change, right? You can't within a sprint adjust unrealized value or current value. Because in here we're talking about things like unrealized value is you know, the potential that's out there. So this is our market share, you know, things like that, that there's a gap that we want to be able to fill. And then current value would be things like, you know, revenue or customer satisfaction. We can't just change that, but we can change the things underneath the organizational capability. These are leading measures, the way I look at it. We can choose to release more often. We can do something in the next month to make that happen. We can choose to focus more on innovative things rather than just fixing bugs and things like that. So I like to focus on those bottom ones and then keep an eye on the top ones to make sure that as we're doing it, those things are going in the right direction. If not, we got to do something else.
And I think for the important aspect is you really like strategically, and I don't want to kind of badmouth the management, but all the things often talked about is very strategic. It's like, yeah, let's do this, let's do that. Great ideas, but how do you make it happen? How do you make people change their behavior? How do you make people act, see things differently? And these are the tactical daily challenges we are really facing. And now, in some of my trainings, I ask people, what are you currently measuring? And I say, yeah, these are all things. I say, great. Now I draw a line and then make a release in the middle. Say, okay, what can you measure before the release and what can you measure after the release? And most of them are after the release. Let's say you make a release every 6 months. What do you measure 5 months and 29 days? There has to be something else in place. And maybe, and if your assumptions are right about those leading measures you can have in place, your lagging validation of the strategic goals should happen. And if they don't, well, at least you would know, or you would have the evidence it didn't work out that way. We need to change something in the way we think and behave.
So this is related to a question that we got in, which you're hitting on now, Ralph. So are you saying that before we release this notion of value, can you measure value before it's delivered?
So the thing is, let's look at outcome and output. So I think output is what we create. Outcome is what will happen. Hopefully it's the right outcome in regards to what we wanted to produce as value for our users. So we might be wrong, but we have to think about, let's say, for example, maybe we realize people are struggling with some process flows in our product, let's say, our software product. So we think about it, maybe we do some sessions with our users, and these are all the things we can measure. We can just say, okay, we did this, we did that, that looks good. Now let's start to work on that. And I think if we can shorten the time frame between leading and lagging, we shorten the feedback loop. And by doing this, we get more often kind of the evidence that what we're doing is right or wrong.
What I'd be interested in is if we're thinking about, we are actually working on complex things too, not being so married into, are we capable of doing it this way? So I won't talk in terms of leading and lagging, but what is our ability to actually run those experiments faster? What is shortening that cycle so that we can learn more things What are those immediate tactical goals that we're doing to get to that intermediate goal to do that? So it's kind of, we're just trying to slam down experiments to get closer to that outcome, is how I would think about it. And when I think about our capability, I think it's easy to focus there first, but like you said, Dom, if it's not in pursuit of value, then why are we trying to build the best engine ever? You know?
Yeah, I'll go as far as saying the two KVAs on the bottom there, ability to innovate and time to market, is everything that Agile is. Like, that's what we're trying to do. That's the assertion that we're making in the Agile world. You know, and I'm not just talking about software here, just the ability to adapt. All we're really trying to do, if you look at all the Agile practices and you look at, you know, DevOps and all of it, it's, can we get more innovative things into the marketplace more often, into our customers' hands more often? That's the leading stuff that we're looking at, right? We've got ability to innovate. Great, we could be doing the most innovative things in the world, but if we're not actually testing them against the market, we've got no value. So these are the two core elements. One without the other isn't good. We could be releasing, you know, every hour, but if all we're doing is just fixing problems and responding just to whenever the customer yells about something and not making progress on our strategic innovative things, then we're not creating any value. And we're not going to see the change in the top things, our lagging indicators. So if we could just do those two things, and the assertion in Agile is what I say, I don't want to put words in anyone else's mouth, is if we could get more valuable, innovative things to our customers more often, then we will see a change. We will see more value. And if not, we adjust. So we have to be keeping an eye on the things on the top.
And building on top what Don just said is that the assertion about agility is basically the organizational capabilities. And I think for me, the proof here is that take a very strong technical company. Take one of the big internet companies. They really are good in their organizational capabilities. They invented their own reality right now they're working on. Now they can pick any domain and get good at it because they understand they have those capabilities. And this is where banks, insurance companies, and some of the other big players are really struggling right now because they have been major players for years. They have huge current value still, but they lack the capabilities to play in the new world.
I think the other thing I'll just add to that as an example to make it tangible is that I had I was working with a company and they are a software provider, or they're building products for customers, and they said, Patricia, it's really amazing where our ability to innovate is getting really good. You know, we had a lot of bugs, or the things we were delivering to our customers were really buggy, and so we've been fixing that up now. We think that will help with the customers. And I said, that's great. Have you been tracking your current value, your customer satisfaction? And they said, yeah. And I said, did you see anything happen? And they said, no. I said, how long's it been? Like, you know, they were doing 3 months and then it was 6 months. And I said, well, maybe it's something else. It's not necessarily all those bugs. Let me ask this question. Actually, I'm going to make a statement first because I want to participate. But this notion of, you know, that it's not just looking at those metrics in a static point of view, right? So whatever you're pursuing, I would hope that you have measurement to know if you have reached it or not, you've achieved something or not. So I would expect measurements to change depending on what we're doing. It's not always going to be that same bunch of information, which is why when we think of this, the top right image you're seeing in the mural, this notion, are we moving toward that goal? Are we moving any closer to the intermediate goal and strategic goal is important information. So one of the things I think that I want to get your opinion on is people have said to me before, Patricia, this is really looking at, you know, how is this helping us figure out how agile we are when all you're talking about is products and services? How would you guys answer that? And how I'm not the product person. I'm not the product woman. I'm not the product man. What does this mean for me? I'm in the development organization. I'm a Scrum Master. What does that mean?
We follow, I know in our organization, this is very similar. So as a product owner, I want to make sure we're delivering value. But as an organization bringing on agility, I want to make sure we're bringing on value too, right? So it fits pretty seamlessly, right? So if I could say to what I like to say is when there's an executive or the buyer or whoever I feel my customer is investing in an agile adoption, I want to say, 6 months from now, a year from now, what would make you happy? You felt that all this money you're investing is worthwhile. Is it number of people trained? Is it how many certifications they got? Is it how many daily scrums have happened? Right? None of that matters at that level. That's not worth the return on investment. So, but if I looked at the same exact areas here, if I could say, well, look at our level of innovation, where we used to, 70% of your budget was spent on just maintenance. And now since we've gone more in this agile direction, we've got that down to 50-50, right? So at least, half your budget's now going to innovation versus 30% back then. Is that worth your investment? Or time to market. You were only getting things out to your customer once a quarter. Now we're doing it twice a month. Is that worth it? Right. So even on those bottom ones, it feels worth it. Now, obviously, the ones on the top would make sense. Your customers are happier, costs have gone down, revenue's gone up. Market opportunities are more visible, anyways, right now, and we're starting to fill that gap. So, I this is exactly what I use to refocus in agile adoption as well. The same things we would use at the product level, we should be using at the organizational level, department level, wherever the agile adoption is happening.
And I think everything we talk about, agility, EBM, it's a tool. It's not an end in itself. It's not, we have to be agile. It's like we want to be able to perform, to work agile in order to achieve some other goals. And I think so many organizations right now, they just say, we want to become agile. Why? Well, everybody else is doing this right now. It's like, okay, maybe you should revisit what's really kind of urging an important aspect for you need to look into. And this could be varying from every organization to every other. And you have to really find their baseline first right now, like where they are right now and where's the pain point for them. And sometimes they don't even know that. And you have to help them. And then it's okay, we should achieve that. And then you can start to formulate, okay, maybe that would be a good intermediate goal. How about that?
Those two things I mentioned are literally things I've heard from people leading an agile adoption effort. Is they're doing this because they want to get everybody trained, right? That's the answer when they say, we want to be agile by 2022. I've literally had somebody say that. I'm like, oh, well, how will you know when you get there? And they go, well, easy. We've already got the metric in place when 80% of the people have attained this certification. And so just asking that question another way, do you think that's how the executives be happy? Is that how you're going to explain the money that we spent on this? Gets us thinking a little bit more in terms of this, right? What's the goal, right? It's all the same thing. What's the goal? What gives us focus for this? What are we ultimately trying to change when we go agile? And how does it map to your organization's objectives? How are we going to track it? So what measurements are we going to put in place because of it? And then how are we going to adjust along the way? What's the feedback loop? What experiments are we going to try to see if we're moving in that direction? Right?
I'm giggling a little bit because I think that's the mystery part of this this webinar, right? It's that mystery of what is value? What do you understand value to mean in your organization? Why are you doing that? And that always seems to be the mystery that we're trying to solve. And if you understand why you're doing something, what is that toward? And hopefully it's toward the pursuit of, I don't know if you can see, but the notion of unrealized value. You're looking at closing that opportunity so that your organization can stay out there a little longer, not so that you can just train up 100 teams, right? Because you can train them all up and then where are they going? So, and especially now, I think with the economy and where we are now and how organizations, at least from what I'm seeing, are trying to say, where do we spend our money and how do we do that? A little bit like, how do we do more with a little bit less? Those things are important. Do you guys think that I should stop sharing screen and we should just take all these questions coming in?
Sure. Let's take some of the questions, yeah.
Are you ready to do that so they can see our faces a little closer up?
Not if this is so good, but anyway.
Yeah. All right. So one of the questions that is interesting, and Don, I think you were starting to hit on this too, but both Ralph and Don, when you are working with clients, do you show them any measurements in terms of these key value areas and the goals? Like, how do you represent and share this information with customers?
I do like to start with saying what would make this successful, right? So if it's a product, why are we making this product? What's the vision, and how do we know that this is going to be successful? If it's an agile adoption, it's like a year from now when we're saying goodbye and we're having our big celebratory party, how will you know it was successful, right? And how does it tie into your organization? When I get to when I talk to an executive or a manager in the organization, even middle management, I ask, why are we going agile? Anybody asks, they should give the same response, not just, don't you know that's our strategy? So I've had executives say things like, well, we really need to bridge the gap between us and the business. That's our my goal this year. And then my question is, do you understand how agile can help with that? And sometimes they don't. They just know that it's on the cover of CIO magazine. That's why we're doing it. So then my job would be, all right, let's go through and see how agility can help achieve that. And then we can start talking about, if they're having trouble coming up with measures, then I would bring in some of these key KVAs to say, well, here's some ideas, right?
I would even take that a further, Don, you and I haven't talked about this, where there are a lot of CIOs who are coming and saying that agile stuff, and they are focused on flow metrics. So the other side of this is they're focused on flow metrics. They're focused on that capability, and that shows that they don't have that connection with business, and they are not talking about things from an outcome-based perspective and the impact that the organization is making toward the world. They're almost like, I don't want to say the little stepchild, but I don't think that they're viewed as this value creation, entity, and how that's working together.
And
so
for me,
like, why do you want to work with business?
And I see one of the problems we're seeing here is like this flow thinking and everything. This has a really strong focus on efficiency. And this doesn't often help. And for me, the problem is often that companies don't really realize what their products are, what produces value for their end users. Like if I go to a bank and I want to buy a house, I need a loan. The loan is the product. This is what helps me to get what I want. Now, if they have internally different components and things like that, sure, these are products themselves as well, but I don't see them as an end user. But all these components need to play together. And this is where this efficiency thinking comes up, because we have all this dependency management coming on, and this falls in everything really, really quickly apart. And I think people often in those situations, they want to improve, but they don't see the big picture, or they have not the chance to be part of a bigger picture. And therefore they try to improve what they are working, what they can improve, but this is in isolation and doesn't really sometimes really impact the bigger picture. So outputs get improved, they get more, but the outcome doesn't change.
Yeah. Well, let's dig a little bit more into the measure parts then, because there's a lot. I'm trying to pay attention and look at these questions. So there is, I think I'll boil it down to this. How do you decide what metrics, what measures are necessary at a minimum? And some of the measures that are commonly measured from Reinerstein's model: cycle time, product cost, product value, development expense, and risk. Now, too bad I turned off the mural. I can turn it back on, but then let me know if you'd like me to. But how do you see what measures, what key value measures, which fall into the KVAs, are necessary?
And we may not have made it clear in it, but part of it is on purpose, right? We don't want to be just about all the metrics, right? All the measurements, which unfortunately gets that reputation for. So, focus, the ability to track the evidence, the way, and the ability to adjust is the goal here. But yeah, if you look at the EBM guide, you're going to see in the appendix a ton of metrics that fall under each of these 4 areas. Your mileage may vary, but I guess the one bit of advice I would give is get at least one for each of the 4 areas. So how will you measure your ability to innovate? Is it, defects? The more defects you have, it's not really about, defects doesn't mean value or no value. It means you're probably spending a lot of time on them rather than innovation. Or just a ratio between the work you're doing each sprint. What percentage is innovative, is against your strategic goals versus just the day-to-day stuff. And then time to market, cycle time. Okay, if you want to use cycle time as a way to measure time to market, okay, that's one. There's other ways of measuring it too, right? How often are we releasing? And what's our throughput, and a lot of those flow metrics can help there as well. But you should pick one from each, absolutely, at least one, and then start small, and then add to it as needed.
Yeah, don't go overboard and measure everything and just drown in data. Try to identify the ones which you think are important, and if they were important, the evidence should come in rather soon, and then you can think about that.
It's also the notion of, are you measuring, and this kind of comes into a risk component, right? Because if you are just measuring to measure, you may not be measuring the important thing and understanding the risk by not putting these things all together. And also, so one of the things that I want to be explicit about is that we have the 4 key value areas here. There are key value measures under each one. Right now in the evidence-based management guide, they are very software heavy because that's generally our space. But Ralph can talk about an apple farm, even just giving some of the examples of what we would be looking at in terms of, output, outcome, how do we think about time to market and those things. And I think the way that I've been thinking about it, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but we've talked about organizational capability and market value and how those things relate. I'm very interested in thinking about this notion of, and there's a lot of questions about OKR, so that's why I'm hitting on this. The notion that we have a goal, and then we're trying to understand productivity. And then you go, okay, but what we're trying to show when I showed the magic wand is this notion of progress. Are we progressing toward a goal? How does EBM help us progress toward a goal? So a lot of people say, hey, we use OKRs for that. We use 40X. OKRs is interesting because what it may show you, what you have to think about, and EBM and OKRs are complementary. Again, what I would encourage people to think about is the notion of that objective, if it's an outcome, output, or activity. And then looking at the results, or what we're looking at, is that stuff, are those things that are just tasks that show us of us being productive, or are those things that can really show us that we're actually making progress on our goal or the objective? So OKRs, think of the objective as the goal, but is that an outcome-based goal, an output, or an activity? And then are those results really telling you if you're meeting that? It'd be interesting to think about, we have a goal, so the results we're going to look at is, are we doing anything from the KVAs from the current value and unrealized value perspective? Can we measure that? And are we doing what we need to do to make sure we have the capability to deliver on things? So ability to innovate and time to market. What I have seen is that people will have OKRs and they say, we have OKRs, they've been given to us, no experimentation there, nothing about any of that stuff. That's not necessarily agility, right? So this is not necessarily creating business agility, but I know that you guys must work with a lot of OKRs too.
Yeah, okay. I mean, OKRs, I guess it's a broader range, right? They're used in, managers and employees working on objectives, right? And key results. And EBM, I hadn't thought about this, but I don't think EBM applies at that level, right? We tend to focus specifically with EBM around products or agile transitions, as adoptions, that kind of thing. And if I were to use OKRs at that level, it would be very similar to what we're talking about, right? The objective would have to be outcome based. I would be focused on it. I think that's what they say with OKRs. It's got to be a goal that it says the company, the team, individuals aim to achieve an overall goal that should be outcome based. And then the key results under those would be more output based, with more leading measures that we can work on. And as we make progress on the key results, then we would see the objective change as well over time. With OKRs, it's all about setting as well a feedback mechanism too, right? How often are we going to look at these? That's should be built into anytime you use an OKR. So the more often you use them, then the better you would probably adjust, or together you can, with your manager, decide to abandon that objective and go on to a different route if the results aren't showing what they need to show, or if the market changes. This is exactly what we're talking about in EBM. It's the same thing with the experiment loop. Is how fast we want to do it.
And I think often OKRs are done because they're check off item, and we have to have OKRs. And I think I would even go a step further back and I think maybe OKBs, like key behaviors. So how do we actually make this change happen? And as we'll talk more about activities, and now activities are leading to an output, but often what I see is that companies are so ingrained activity driven because this is what they have done in the past, but all their activities from the past don't lead to the right outcome. And then they blame everything else, but they don't blame the way they get to the output, which should be the outcome. So start off with the objective, think about the intermediate steps, the key results along the way, and then think about what should you be doing to actually get there and drive your activities, your behaviors from that, and ignore everything you had in your existing organization structures, processes before that, because this could be horribly wrong.
Yeah, I think if you're using it the way that Don is talking about, that's great. If you are using it in a way that people aren't cognizant of the outcomes that they're looking for, it's just a different way of micromanagement, to be honest. And there's not a leeway in there. So Ralph, you were hitting on some stuff that would get into this in terms of activity. Let's say people are working on, they call it an agile project, right? And so they're wondering what are some indicators that would work? Is that where you need to look at things like velocity? Is that how you know that you're doing better?
I mean, velocity is like one of the things is that it can be helpful, but for me, this is more like internally. And the way I like to make a joke about it now, you don't ask your wife, what's your weight right now? Because this is recipe for a big argument. But, stepping on a scale every day gives an idea like, oh, well, last weekend I just overdid it a little bit. So I have to maybe go for a run or watch out for that. I think so velocity could be helpful within the boundaries of a Scrum team to say, like, how are we doing? Are we kind of improving over time? But this should be only internal. This should never be really exposed to the outside, in my opinion. So, and this is kind of, so there could be some activities you could do internally, but again, having a good high velocity, but driving in the wrong direction would never get you to a destination either. So go ahead.
I like to refer to those as the cockpit metrics, right? Exactly what you're saying is they're important for us who are flying the plane. Nobody else, the passengers don't necessarily need to know what the hydraulic pressure is and the barometric pressure outside. I don't know much about planes, but they don't, all that information, tons of data, metrics that allow them to inspect and adapt the flight is not for the customers, it's not for management, it's for them so that they can do better. And if velocity is used that way, then it's great. The moment it's outside and now you've got passengers wondering why the hydraulic pressure isn't 100% anymore, and it just creates needless panic and meddling. It's cockpit metrics, and there's a bunch like that. Like all those activity ones, I would say, would be put under that. I like to joke that I love, in the software world, lines of code is a great metric. For the team, if we're being measured on it by people on the outside, it's bad. But as soon as I bring it up, it's like, oh no, that's a horrible thing. But shouldn't you want to know as a team if that doubled last sprint, or if it got cut in half? Like that's information, that's data that should be in our cockpit. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I don't know anything about planes except. Anyways, but like
we don't fly anymore these days. That's the only thing I know about planes.
I don't know anything about planes.
What's the plane?
Yeah,
when you jump in, when I jump into a car, I want to know if I'm going to make it to my destination. Do I have enough gas? All those things. Yeah, so 6 minutes left. There are still a bunch of questions, and I will say we will look at all these different questions and try to respond. Now, let's say we are again talking to a Scrum Master. All right, so we're definitely product focused people, but as coaches, if we were talking to a Scrum Master who was looking at trying to enable the organization, enable the team, and they're thinking about using EBM, should they? Is this the right way? Would they approach it from metrics first? What would that approach look like for you, your suggestion?
I mean, the Scrum Master serves the whole Scrum team, which includes the product owner and developers in various ways. And I think this is for me the separation of power, and I need to trust as my product owner is a good product owner as a Scrum Master, and vice versa. So I need to trust that my Scrum Master is knowing what he or she is doing. But in case you sense this is a little bit out of bounds, I think then as a Scrum Master, you should really start and talk to your product owner, like, okay, what is the vision of the product? What do you really want to achieve? This, I think, maybe first of all, what is your product? Could you explain that to me? Why are we doing what we're doing? What's the vision of that? What would be the first intermediate goal or product goal? And guide this product owner through that by asking meaningful questions, and then maybe do a story mapping session and things like that, and guide them along those ways, and then open their eyes, saying, why are we doing all these things? And how, by the way, how could we know that we actually did good, that we were successful? What could we measure? And then slowly, don't say this is EBM, this is what we're doing. I think this is how you overrun people, but slowly bring in those ideas, and then I see, oh yes, that's a great idea. Maybe we should get something. And then maybe then as a Scrum Master, you would go to your developers and say, hey guys, could you build that into the product, that we get those measurements actually out of the product?
This is one of my, we all know, like I'm on my I get up on my pedestal and say, yell about metrics all the time and say, hey, here's what we should be doing. And it's easy for me to say. It's easy for us to say, hey, read this, look at this webinar, and then you're all set. Probably the hardest thing is to just put it in place. It's not hard to do. Putting the measurements in place is not hard to do. It's just hard to just keep that cadence up. It's just like, we all know what to do to lose weight, but why don't we do it? I'm like horrible at it. I know exactly what I should do. I'm not doing it. And this is, to me, the value of a Scrum Master. Is the Scrum Master is that personal trainer that's there with you, that making sure that you're following through on your commitments. As a team, we want to do this. We all agree. But in the whirlwind of everyday activity, we don't do it. We get busy, and these things fall through the cracks. A good coach is there to catch those things and hold us accountable for these things. As long as we agreed that we want to do this, then we're giving the Scrum Master permission to hold us accountable. Of course, they don't have to be doing the work. They have to make sure we're doing it. Hey, we said we were going to do this. Why aren't we doing it? Do we not want to do this anymore? It's the hardest thing. By the time the metrics, I find that we get typically, even on projects I'm involved with, it's like, by the time we actually get them in place, we've lost that first initial, let's say 6 months of trending that would give us so much information. Just put something in place and start measuring. It doesn't have to be every sprint, but once a month. Can we just like pull this stuff together? Everybody's got their own things to put in place and go. And like Ralph said, is start with the goal. That should come right from the Scrum Master should be coaching the product owner there. That strategic goal and intermediate vision in the product goal is absolutely a product owner thing. But your product owner may not know that that's part of their responsibility. They're probably busy writing acceptance criteria and stories. They're not there yet. So understanding what their real role is in terms of vision and value is how a Scrum Master should be working with the product owner, and then helping the whole Scrum team with the cadence of actually measuring this stuff.
You're on such a roll. I feel bad for interrupting you. But vision, value, validation. I mean, so there are a couple things, and again, there are a lot of questions here, and we'll get to them in one way or another. But this notion of even when you're talking about, the weight, right? There's a little bit here around behavior, right? So we know how to do things. Even if we just want to lose weight, you know how to do that, right? You can just drive down all the water. But do we know that we'll be healthy later on? Right? We don't know that. And then do I know that I won't be hit by a bus later on? I don't know that either, right? So there are things that are super hard to measure, but what Don is saying that's really important is this notion of getting the cadence, getting that muscle, getting that behavior driven around reviewing and understanding the measurement. Sprint review at our company, we do it once a month, the larger numbers. But making sure that we are adapting that to what we are pursuing as we are moving on and along, right? Some other measures will become more important. And one thing that I like to think about is for current value, it's not necessarily just about customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction. It's what is your customer looking for from your product? Are you satisfying that? How would you measure that usage? So there are other things that will be specific to your organization. So the other thing that I would encourage, there's something in here about behaviors and, how do you measure that behavioral change? And I'm not sure that that's something that we would measure. What I'm interested in the outcome and how behaviors might start to change because of that. If we don't have goals, if we have goals, but the teams are not invested in them, what else is there? Are the goals not clear? Is everything just being thrown down? There's a lot there that I think the Scrum Master can start to help pull apart. I think I'm gracefully supposed to pull up the PowerPoint to close this, but I'm not going to. But feel free. You can find us on LinkedIn. What are your emails?
And I see a lot of good questions still there that I'm dying to answer. And somebody said, is there a way to put them out there? Maybe that's something we can do, is when we post this, that we could probably put if we could somehow save all these questions, I would love to take a chance at just writing in some answers for it. And maybe we can put it in one spot. No, not promising anything, because this is putting work on other people's plate.
These are the good intentions, yeah.
I'd be happy to do it. And as Patricia said, if you want to add me on LinkedIn, or I'd be happy to continue this conversation.
Yeah.
Same here. Find me on LinkedIn, reach out. Let's talk.
All right. Thank you everyone for participating. We'll figure out how to get some more of this information out there. Thank you to both of you. And also, Ralph, Jocham, you're doing a Deciphering Goals talk. If you guys want to dive deeper into goals and a product goal canvas and all that stuff, that's you next week?
Next week, yes. Same time, same place, just a week later. Yes.
Unless this is
and there is a blog to be released about this talk as well, later today, maybe tomorrow. So.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.